science of turning fiction into fact.
Sometimes kind of real architectural life interferes with intellectual architectural life.
There is no such thing as architecture.
Hello everyone, this is Vikram Prakash and you are listening to Architecture Talk. Each week we try and have a conversation with a contemporary thinker with the purpose of trying to advance the frontier of architectural thinking. Today and next week I will be having a conversation with two people from India, Neelkanth Chhaya and Arshia Sattar. And I met them this summer as part of an online studio that was conducted in India called Poche, in which a couple of architects and faculty got together a fabulous team of academics and international critics to run an online studio with almost 80 Indian students. I was one of the invited outside critics, and as part of that, I made contact with Chhaya and Arshia. I've of course known Neelkanth Chhaya for a long time, almost 20-30 years. And perhaps some of you might know him as the very distinguished faculty of what used to be the School of Architecture at the Center for Environmental Planning and Technology, Ahmedabad. Now it's a very different institution, and Chhaya is not really a part of it. But until it changed about 10 years ago, Chhaya was certainly a centerpiece of the conversation of that school. I talked to him about architectural pedagogy today, living, working, and teaching in the time of coronavirus, and about architecture and life in general. I hope you enjoy the conversation and look for the next part of this conversation with Arshia Sattar in 2 weeks. Here we go.
Welcome to Architecture Talk, Chhaya.
Very good to see you again.
Such a pleasure always to talk with you, and I'm so glad, as we were saying, thankful to coronavirus Sahab that has not only isolated us, but has also, because it has normalized this Zoom business, gives us an opportunity to connect with friends, with old friends. And I remember the first time we met, I think it was in 91 or 92 or somewhere there.
Yes.
And Varki was the director of the CEPT School of Architecture. And I remember walking in with long hair, sort of this trying to be cool looking, PhD student from Cornell. And
you were cool looking, you know.
Thank you. And trying to spout deconstruction and who knows what all. And Varki said, "Acha dam hai to chalo studio padhao Chhaya ke saath."
Yeah, great time actually. Yes.
Yeah, I thought it was a wonderful opportunity. Really enjoyed the introduction into the CEPT community and to teach with you. But we meet again through a studio, huh? Now we are, but it's in the online world, and you are helping lead and teach an online innovative studio, which I'm so impressed by, first by the methodology that, to run an online studio so successfully with global speakers, global critics, and, quite a large student audience and serious content. So tell me about the studio a little bit and what you're trying to achieve yourself in the studio. What is the pedagogy here?
Yeah, the studio started as a conversation between many people who were interested in, actually it began with the Central Vista project and to do something in relation to that. But there was also another idea that with COVID, everything has become online. And it is very important to find out how we can actually recreate the sense of community that exists in a classroom, in a live classroom. Because in my view, the half the learning is peer learning,
Yes,
at least
yes.
half.
Informal,
And,
haptic.
and yes, and the atmosphere of the classroom can galvanize thought.
Yes,
Online, this is a very, very difficult thing.
yes, yes.
And so how to crack that? And we had no idea. And I particularly am sort of a Luddite, as I told you once. So I don't know how to
You're not, but anyway.
So that we started thinking about it.
Hmm.
And one thought was that the large number of people can be seen as a problem or can be seen as a potential. And we thought having a large number of participants from all kinds of backgrounds is a very interesting thing to have, which meant that your studio could not be purely focused on the disciplinary model of architecture, but it had to create an environment of thought in which many different kinds of people could participate.
Okay, so there are non-architecture students in the studio?
There were some. In the early part, there were many. Then our failure is that we couldn't keep them on.
Oh, okay.
Because
So you attempted a cross-disciplinary studio, huh? That is very impressive.
Absolutely.
Achha.
There were people. There is one engineer who continued right through. He's a services engineer, and he said that he's become transformed. He'll never think about pipes in the same way again. So, which was great fun yesterday. But there were others, people from the humanities, the social sciences, from the field of design. And so our planning was that we should make the discussion something to which many kinds of approaches could happen. Second, and this I've been convinced about in the last 3 or 4 years, or more maybe, that the individual designer, the problem, and the collective wisdom is what we will have to learn to use.
What do you mean?
Yeah, I'm not using the word collaborative because that's become chewed up and been standardized into a managerial framework.
Yeah.
So yes, the bureaucracies, all the bureaucracies of thought, they come and they do these things. They take up very, very fine ideas, but turn them into dross.
Formulas,
Yes. So, but I thought that this collective thinking process is something which has to be organized.
Okay.
That is one. Second thing, that the idea of ownership of creativity has to be reduced. And therefore, in my last 5 years or so, whatever teaching I've done, I've never allowed a student to hold on to her project through the semester.
So you
She
have it
always
passed through.
pass it on. And the students, the participants called it Chinese whispers. And it's like a game in class that you do something, you pass it on, the next person works on it, then you pass it. And along with that, there is a kind of a joke of having a delivery slip, with everything written, what you give. And there is the other person has to sign off and say, I received it in good order. And so what happens is that in the end, you get back something that you started with, but it has gone through at least 20 other minds. And it means that you are now into a completely, and you have to create in the class that sense of mutual respect, so that you will not throw out anybody's ideas, even if they're completely different from yours, and you will think about it. You may in the end edit or even leave out. But so this process of the circular motion of thought within a cohort of people is something which happened. Now, in that, the studio therefore had to be divided into rooms. We call them rooms. And yes, so there is a Meroli room, and there is Kakanagar room.
Yeah.
And every room had 6, 7, 8 students. And they worked out something. So the point is that the straight line notion of design as proceeding from an analysis to a conceptualization to evolution into design, that gets disturbed greatly by this process.
Yeah.
And everything comes back in a kind of iterative process.
So why is
And
this important? Why is this kind of collective process important today?
I think it's important because you otherwise get a system which is absolutely pyramidal. And those who are at the top of the pyramid fight hard to remain there. And those who are at the bottom struggle hard to move up. And I don't think that's a good way of organizing human activity, especially when human life is threatened by all these things, climate change, you name it. It's all in front of us.
Yes,
And
yes.
we have to learn a listening mode rather than a telling mode. We're telling too many things to each other.
Right,
And
right.
we have to learn to listen. And for that, the sort of erasure of the individual ownership of ideas. All societies used to do, except that today, with the market as the model, the ownership of brand has become something extremely powerful. And I think there should be some explorations at least as to what other ways of I organize my office that way. Any project, there are 4 people sitting on different boards and they're given 4 phrases.
Yeah.
They all start working. And then it starts a dialogue. So this is something which I think more and more we will have to develop as something which is a model of governing thought or coordinating thought.
So this is a interesting thing. I mean, 2 things occur to me. One is that it's fascinating that you are producing it as a kind of an emergency response to the climate and international global health emergencies, and hoping to, I believe, normalize it, make it, the new practice of being in the world. And the other thing that is, it's a critique of, or at least I read it as a critique of masters.
Yes.
Our discipline, our practice is very dominated by masters. So from the 20s onwards, ye reet pratha chali aa rahi hai. What is your thought on this whole masters?
I think at some point in time that may have been a useful device. But certainly in the last at least 50 years, it has been a destructive device.
Destructive?
Yes.
How so?
Because I think what happens is that every master gets trapped in their own style. And therefore we never find anything real coming up. It is a kind of configuration of building which is meant to simulate the master. The master himself starts simulating himself.
Yes. They become their own imitations. Yes. That is true.
I think that is a very dangerous, or it is not dangerous, leave it. But I think it's something which is not giving us enough diversity of architecture. It's not bringing about a kind of upsurge. You can see that in that 20s phase that you're talking about, there was a systematic decimation of other modes of thought.
Yes, there was. There was sort of a intellectual genocide. Modernism has given us a lot of things, but it's certainly one of its ills has been that it sort of wiped out all kinds of other
only 4 or 5 people remained, and everybody else either had to be their followers or their opponents.
Yeah, it's totalitarian in that sense. So it also seems to remind me a little bit of, they talk about crowdsourcing nowadays, sort of digital term. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that as a sort of architectural thinking methodology?
It's something which might have very, very interesting results, but I can't think of a way in
Hmm.
which you could do it with a serious question. Because you see, when you're talking to those whom you cannot see, you will have to state the position in the clearest possible way and ask a question of this or that or range of this, how much here up to there, etc.
Hmm.
And most human questions are not like that.
Hmm.
They are questions of great complexity and subtlety.
Hmm.
And a group which is working together, it's different from a crowd source.
Yeah.
And I think David Bohm wrote about dialogue.
Who?
David Bohm, he was a
David.
physicist, and he wrote a book on dialogue. And he
Hmm.
said minimum number of people should be 20.
Acha.
Yeah. And then he says, well, he says not minimum, but he says optimum number should be
Right.
around
Right.
20. And then there should be no leader
Hmm.
in that discussion.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that is something which is, if there is anything that happened wrong in the studio that we just did, is
Hmm.
that we were unable to erase ourselves to the extent that we should.
That's very difficult, I mean,
Very
because
difficult.
the structure of a
Very enjoyable to
studio.
talk, you know. It's very
Uh,
enjoyable that there are 40, 50, 60, 100 people listening to you and you're talking
uh-huh.
and it gives you a high of a certain kind. And to stay away from that and
Yeah.
to listen is a
Hmm.
discipline which is extremely difficult.
It is.
But I think in most situations, including the situation of politics, including the situation of running a household, including the situation of running a school of architecture, this listening part is going to become exceedingly important.
Hmm. Hmm.
Without that, we are going to crash.
I mean, yeah, I mean, you brought it into politics. I mean, the notion of democracy
Hmm.
is intended to, activate this idea of collective listening, right? I mean, it's a
Yes.
very weak notion that, all you can do is vote and
Yes.
vote anonymously.
Hmm.
And with the Central Vista project and your studio that you're doing, in some ways, it is how it is the question of social listening, public listening that is at question, is it not?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And
You know?
and much of the work will be on scale.
Huh.
If your scales are so large that only way is by voting, then
Hmm.
you're going to have distortions
Hmm.
running through the system.
Hmm.
And that will happen in politics as much as it will happen in the other fields of human endeavor.
Hmm.
And I think that scaling the units of work
Hmm.
to a at least recognizable dimension so that you know each other, and so there will have to be large numbers of smaller units of governance, units of economic activity, units of thought process. Not that they will be sealed off from each other. There will certainly have to be the dependence on intense conversation rather than on mass conversation. If the 20th century was about mass culture, this is going to be a century of perhaps of small group culture.
Small group culture. I mean, that's an interesting proposition. So I'm thinking, well, the Greeks imagined democracy as only really applicable to a group where everybody more or less knows each other, right?
Yes.
So they thought it was only applicable in a reasonable sized city, and in that city, really it only applies to a certain subsect.
Mm.
And Hannah Arendt said democracy, needs the public square, and the square has to be only large enough where people can, sort of know each other haptically. So is that what you're talking about by question of
Yes.
scale, or what do you mean?
Yeah. That partly it's a question of yes, knowing each other. That means the Greek polis. The other question of Arendt's question of spatial size
Yeah.
is also an important thing.
Huh.
If you are aware of the work that Sandeep did in Bhuj, for example.
Yes. Sandeep Virmani. Yes.
Yes. The attempt to bring local governance into the forefront of decision making, rather than the acceptance of project schemes which came from larger scale, was a very interesting notion. And they achieved some quite good things with that. And I think the more the methods of doing that kind of work evolve, and I can see that across India and across the world, there are very many people who are trying to work at that scale of small enough scale that it is possible to hold what you in the US call the town hall meeting.
Local self-governance.
Town hall meeting has become huge, and it's televised and all that.
Town hall American term has become normalized now, but let us stay with the Indian context and examine this idea of local self-governance. As the Sandeep Virmani example you gave in Bhuj with the Hunarshala and all the other organizations over there, and sort of weigh and balance that against the Nehruvian vision of the Indian democratic nation state, right? And well, internationally, and I think in India also, we still celebrate the fact that 1.2 million people, but we are still a functioning democracy.
Yes.
Alternately, one could argue, well, our functioning democracy has devolved into a kind of a semi-autocracy with sort of a hierarchy, hereditary sort of rulers on one side and kind of a demagogues on the other side by some kind of populist notions. So, kahan ki democracy, but I don't know. Weigh the nation state and the nation state project in India versus this idea of local self-governance. What are your weigh Chandigarh against the Hunarshala little project?
That's a very, very interesting but extremely difficult question. Give me a time to think over it. Meanwhile, let us talk about scale still. And I think there was some usefulness to what Nehru did. Because some things, say, for example, infrastructure at the national scale have to be done at the large scale. But everything can't be done that way. And it is the good judgment about what decisions require that big scale. And yet, is it possible to listen to the constituencies throughout? So if I talk about architecture, it might mean that if I'm designing a city, then I might have to make it into an exercise where a number of different firms are doing all kinds of different things. Hundreds, basically hundreds. I mean, I'm thinking of something like the new capital of Andhra Pradesh. And if it would have been designed as something which was done by 200 young practices, and what it could have led to, with only one or two or three parts of the city being designed by what we call senior architects, the masters. And some of the symbolic spaces can be made at a scale which is sufficient. But there would be thousands of other things that would happen, including people's own initiatives. And I like, for example, the work that John Turner wrote about in Chile.
70s.
70s. And then what happened with the with Doshi's Indore project, where, the locals simply took over the project. They accepted the planning guideline, but they never accepted the architecture, which was very nice. Actually, I think it's a wonderful way in which people opined through building. And I think if that kind of process is given more prominence, that you have, and Habrakan has been, of course, talking about this all the time, at the scales of decision making. And I think there is value there. Now then, if I come to Chandigarh, there are, one is of course the grid plan and the scale of the grid plan. There might have been some modifications, given that most of us don't have cars. I mean, most Indians at that time and in foreseeable future would not have cars. So the sector size could have been somewhat smaller. But otherwise, it is a device for organizing flat land. Is anything very, very novel or unusual about that?
Let's abstract this a little bit, Chhaya.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that the grid as such versus, let's say, the informality of the old city of Ahmedabad or Venice, for that matter, do you think the grid, which is often articulated as democratic, is actually totalitarian?
No, neither. I don't think so. I once took a plan of Ahmedabad and traced the distorted grid. It's a grid of streets at roughly 65 to 70 meters apart in both directions. And it's a very interesting walkable distance, 70 meters. And so there is a grid, but which distorts itself to fit the topography. So on relatively flat land, there is some usefulness to having that regularity. But it should not become a sort of demigod who prevents you from thinking. And if your topography is leading to water courses and so on, then your grid will necessarily distort and deform.
Sure.
That must have been the case in Venice as well.
But I thought I heard you say the reverse, that mostly it would be great to just have the streets flow as they will. Let the small practices do what they want. And every now and then, maybe we can have an oasis of gridded beauty, the work of the masters.
The small practices and the people, they are working within a commonly accepted framework, which is neither sort of oppressive, nor is it a free-for-all. And I think even if you look at a place like Dharavi, or you look at any slum in India, the rigor of setting out streets is not a joke. There's human thought which has gone into it. And
what is the design DNA of Dharavi from your perspective?
Well, it is like, I think there are the mafia who decide where the main movements will be. Now that overlaid with water courses, that overlaid with drainage of rainwater, because in Mumbai rainwater is a big thing. All of that starts creating a sort of fabric which is reasonably rational. It's not completely rational, but it is reasonably rational, I think. And this is not only here. I've seen it, for example, in Nairobi, where I grew up. And the Mathare Valley is a slum area where all the water goes down to the river and your layout respects that water.
How long did you live in Nairobi? I mean, how old were you when you...
I was born there.
You were born there?
Yes. My father went to Africa in 1927.
27, acha.
Yeah. And he worked all his life in one firm, Shell.
Oh, Burma Shell. I see.
Yes.
I see. So he was an oil man.
Well, he was a clerk in this oil firm and an accountant. But all of us, 5 brothers and sisters, we were all born there, grew up there. And we grew up in a colonial Kenya. When I was a small kid, the Mau Mau insurgency was happening around us. And so there was sort of fear in the air, but still, it was a very wonderful place to grow up in. And so I grew up in Kenya. But I had a very strange childhood because my father was very, very insistent that we must know Gujarati and we must know the stories of our lore so that we don't lose touch with our roots. And so at home, either you had to speak pure Gujarati or pure Swahili or pure English. No mixture was allowed. With very, very clear habit structures, which sort of created a certain kind of mind. So all of us grew up in that environment. And
Can you still speak Swahili?
Sorry?
Can you still speak Swahili?
Very little. Because, I've been away from there since 85. So then, but we used to come to India on what was called home leave. In the colonial times, you would get home leave. 1.5 months, we would be in India. And it was my father's duty to take all his relatives on a pilgrimage. So when I was very, very young, North India pilgrimage. But when I could remember things, at that age, we did a pilgrimage of South India. So you traveled by trains, you ate all the food at the different stations, you heard languages, you heard singing of different kinds on the station platform. And so it was a very multicultural kind of environment. Because Kenya also is multicultural, still is, I suppose. And so it was one kind of a different growth process.
Well, that's interesting. So you had this sort of multilingual but cleanly separated growing up.
Yeah.
And then 85, and where did you go to architecture school?
So I came to study in Ahmedabad. From 69 to 75, I studied at SET. After 79, I worked with Rajeev for a while. And then my parents said, no, now you have to come back. Been away too long. And I worked in a private firm. And ultimately, I joined the University of Nairobi, where I taught for about 5 years.
So you always wanted to teach? Is that, did you like practice at that time in Nairobi? Or
no, I liked practice when I was with Rajeev. I mean, I was simply a minion doing the drawings. Here I had a taste of the teaching system. When I assisted Jaimini Mehta at SET. So I got a taste of it and I really loved it. So when I went there, for 2 years I slogged away at this firm. But didn't like the work that was happening.
So tell me a little bit about the intellectual milieu at SEPT 69 to 74. What was it like those days? I mean, in a sort of a flavor sense rather than the detail.
It was a kind of interesting phase because by the time I was in third year, the people who had started the school, Doshi and Bernard Cohn and Vakil, all three had gone on to different activities. Doshi's practice was building up in a big way, and Bernard Cohn had gone back to France, and Dr. Vakil was into his office. But still, of course, Doshi was there for some time, and then Hasmukh Patel was there. Both of them were able to pull a lot of people together. So we had very unstructured environment. One studio would go like this, another studio would go in a completely different way. And there was a kind of even a sort of tension, or not a tension, but at jury times, there would be fights between them.
Achha.
Yeah, and we could get away with many things because they would fight on our behalf. So it was a very interesting time. You could hear a lot of different ideas. Of course, the visitors to the school continuously injected discussion and debate into the whole community. So it was that kind of a place which didn't have a kind of big agenda to push. It didn't have a very clear idea of which pedagogy was. It had some idea, yeah, reasonably, but not a kind of. But it was about experiments. Sure, that's for sure.
Got it. Got it. So, is that the kind of school you are trying to, you would like to recreate today or for the future? Or was this the sept that you were teaching in?
Yeah.
In the...
Well, because you see, when Varki came, he made it much more streamlined.
Yes. He was the man of...
There was a clear curriculum, there was a progression, there was a systematic build-up, etc., which was very, very useful. Because if at a certain stage in the school, you need to gather together some of the things that you have, fooled around with. And there were very many good things that were fooled around with. So, yes, that period was there. But when I then later, after some time, I took over as director. And at that time, my idea was that the more we can have a variety of young people, the more we can get the dynamism of debate going.
What are your thoughts on the state of architectural education in the country today? I mean, there are like, I don't know, 160, 170 schools of architecture are here, maybe more.
It's almost 500.
500?
Yeah, this is what I hear. So, that was one of the reasons for doing this online studio, because we had this bleeding heart for students who had no teachers. So, yeah, but some schools are very good. I know of 6 or 7 schools across the country. Many of them in the south. There are a number of good things happening. Amongst the younger architects, there is a lot of questioning and a lot of good discussion, which I've seen in towns, in different places. So that part is very good. This the Chandigarh, Delhi, Ahmedabad, Bangalore axis. Of course, there are also some really poorly served schools who can't get good faculty, or can't get faculty even, and who are just in the thing because, they have a university and they would like to have an architecture school, because architecture school gives a certain cultural gravitas. Partly some of them would be for the money of it.
Of course.
Those are bad, but these 6, 8, 7, 10 schools, I think some very interesting things might happen. And without the schools even, the younger architects, I think, are many of them on the ball.
Really? That's good.
Yeah, I have great hopes for young practices.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I mean, because that's nice. I mean, because I was very impressed. I look at some things like, there was that exhibition that Aniket Bhagwat and Riaz organized, which was quite interesting. And I see the studio. So it seems like there is something of a discourse in play in the community. Huh? I mean, it's not just globalization and world-class shit,
No. Yeah, if it was, that would be really funny, no?
I mean, that would be really good because, sitting out here very far away in the United States, we used to think of, Ahmedabad as the center of architectural discourse, and, you could sort of tap it and beat it up and argue and whatever else. But it feels a bit more dispersed.
There are 4 schools which agreed to do what they call a connected collaborative studio. And they did studios with a common subject, each in their own schools, but 2 students from the other schools came into each school. So if there was a cohort of 30, they got 6 from another school. And so there was a sort of sharing, which also meant that some of the small town kids could actually go to Mumbai or Mysore or Calicut, and they've never seen these places. So it was good that way. But then at the end of it, they did a joint exhibition and a student and faculty discussion for 3 days.
3 days.
And the 3 days. And the amount of student participation in the discussions was outstanding. And I think this is something which I can feel in the air as something, there's a hunger for doing something. Well, the creative outlet, when you see others like you, so that kind of organized meeting, not like the social meetings that things like NASA have, the national
that's different.
Yeah, that's different. But this kind of thing, it's something which starts happening, and I think there is a possibility with that. Of even the less endowed schools to participate in things which are of some significance.
Yeah, and something new and different will emerge. And I'm wondering, what is the flavor of the discourse? I mean, here in the United States, we, as you were articulating earlier, there is a sense of urgency, sort of a sense of emergency, oh my God, we need to do something. Climate, of course, has become very big, and now, equity, diversity, race relationships in the United States and even worldwide. There is a sense of near panic. 10 years ago, it used to be globalization, and it used to be the digital economy, and it used to be, there was a sense of, well, there are things we can do. But now there is a slight unease, What is the discourse in India?
I wouldn't say that it's really sunk in the urgency of climate change, for example. I don't think it's really affected people to that extent. I think one reason is that as people who have grown up on this subcontinent, you tend to become very tough and able to take all kinds of situations. So there is this attitude, all right, we'll do when it comes, or I will start thinking about it, but don't get panicked. Second thing is that out of this, I feel that there is a fork. On one side are those who look at managerial capacity, organizational clarity, investment, and high technology as the answer. And the other side looks at traditional knowledges and artisanal skills, the capacity of people to work together, the capacity to build something very large with very tiny teams, all of that. So these are the two, that's the form. The urban practices, which are very successful urban practices, would go for the first one. But there are a large number of other practices which are looking at alternative modes of operation. And not from a romantic point of view, but from a very pragmatic point of view, given the kind of situation of money, of knowledge, of training, all of that, the dependence on the traditional forms of organization is a very interesting one. Now, it has its problems in terms of the injustices towards labor. And if one can crack that and give the person who is working the dignity and the earning that he needs to have, then I think you've got a different kind of model of how things could happen. And in terms of overall sustainability, the one looks like a kind of greenwash to my mind. I have my own personal likings and dislikings. I should do what do you call it? A disclaimer notice. I am more in favor of working from the small groups and the some kind of working out, and some problems will be there. We'll sort them out. It's like organizing an Indian wedding.
So as we move towards the end here, towards the last questions, this sort of argument, this fork that you are describing between alternative grassroots kind of practices, concepts, ideologies, and pedagogies versus the big scale, this is an argument that has been that started with the critiques of modernism in the 70s.
Yes.
And the master planning and big cities. And now I suppose modernism has given way to, managerial practices, as you are calling them. But the debate, not the debate, the sort of or form of the debate seems to be the same.
Technology itself has two possibilities. One is the possibility of individuals appropriating it, or small groups appropriating it. And other is the large scale superstructure, which uses technology to control space. And I think the smaller scale technologies are being used increasingly by those who believe in traditional knowledge. For example, you look at any Indian craftsman, and you will find that he has already adopted all the kinds of gadgets which he can hold in his hand.
Mobile phone.
Yeah, mobile phone, the small scale stone cutting device, the saw, electric saw, all those things are there. So it's not as if that they're going to remain sort of drudgery, continuing, etc., etc. So it will be a very interesting thing that happens. On the other side, the bigger scale people also have started seeing that even if they have a very large thing, subdividing it into many, many groups makes a lot of sense. Some of them have started doing that. And I think this is a kind of exploration that both sides are doing. So it won't be the kind of either or, my feeling is. And
that's good.
In that sense, it's not a critique of modernism. It's more a critique of how do you organize society for a more happier form of existence. Something like that.
Yeah. Well, sir, it is always such a pleasure to talk to you, to discuss the world, the globe, climate, education, and pedagogy. Thank you for having this conversation with me.
Thank you very much. It was extremely enjoyable.
Thank you for listening to Architecture Talk. This is your producer, Amelia Jarvinen. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and if you did, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Spotify. We would also love to hear from you if you have any suggestions on new topics or guests. You can always reach out to us on our website, Facebook, or Instagram. Thanks again, and until next time, this is Architecture Talk.